In this episode, we're going to build a spoken study plan you can actually follow day to day without needing charts, apps, or complicated tracking systems. A lot of new learners start with motivation and good intentions, then get stuck because they don't know what to do first, how long to spend, or how to tell whether they are improving. The trick is to treat the exam objectives like a set of skills you are training, not a pile of pages you are trying to finish. When your plan matches every objective, you stop gambling on what might show up, and you start building coverage on purpose. We'll focus on a routine you can speak out loud to yourself, because spoken recall is one of the best ways to test whether you truly understand something. If you can explain an idea clearly in your own words, you can usually answer a scenario question about it. The foundation of a plan like this is knowing what it means to match an objective, because people often misunderstand that phrase. Matching an objective does not mean reading it and nodding, and it does not mean collecting notes until you feel busy. Matching an objective means you can do the mental action the objective implies, such as classify, assess, prioritize, coordinate, validate, or communicate, using simple information and reasonable assumptions. A study plan is effective when it makes you practice those actions repeatedly until they feel natural. For a beginner, that practice has to be small enough to fit into real life, because a plan that requires long, perfect study sessions will collapse the first time you have a tiring week. So instead of building one huge routine, you build a set of short spoken drills that you can rotate. When the drills add up, you get full objective coverage without feeling overwhelmed. Before you build the routine, you need a way to translate objectives into spoken prompts, because that is how you turn static words into training. A spoken prompt is a question you ask yourself that forces you to explain, compare, or decide. If an objective is about preparation, your prompt might be to explain why preparation reduces chaos and what good preparation looks like in plain language. If an objective is about incident classification, your prompt might be to describe what information you would need to classify an incident and what could go wrong if you guessed too early. If an objective is about tracking, your prompt might be to explain what makes status accurate and how a timeline supports decisions and evidence. These prompts work because they create retrieval, which is the act of pulling information from memory without looking at it. Retrieval reveals gaps quickly, and gaps are not a failure. They are the map of what to study next. Now you can build the plan around a simple weekly cycle that keeps everything moving without requiring complicated planning. Think of the week as having two kinds of sessions: build sessions and test sessions. Build sessions are where you learn or refresh an idea, and test sessions are where you speak it back without help. Beginners often do only build sessions, which feels comfortable, but comfort does not predict exam performance. The exam asks you to select the best answer under time pressure, and that requires retrieval, not recognition. So your plan should include frequent test sessions, even when you feel unsure, because uncertainty is exactly what training is for. A good balance is to make test sessions shorter but more frequent, so they become routine rather than intimidating. Over time, you will notice your spoken explanations become smoother, and that is a strong sign your thinking is becoming exam ready. To make sure you match every objective, you also need a coverage method that is simple enough to do in your head. One method is to group objectives into a handful of themes that reflect the work of incident leadership, such as readiness, coordination, situational awareness, decision-making, communication, recovery, and improvement. You are not creating a formal outline. You are creating mental folders so you can remember where each objective belongs. When you sit down for a spoken session, you pick a folder and then pull one objective-sized idea from it. This prevents you from studying only what feels familiar, which is a common trap. It also prevents you from bouncing randomly between topics, which feels productive but often leaves holes. The key is that each week you touch every folder at least once, so no area goes silent for too long. When the exam mixes topics, your brain will be used to switching contexts without losing clarity. Your spoken plan also needs a consistent structure for each mini-session, because structure reduces decision fatigue. Start by stating the concept in a single clear sentence, then expand it with why it matters, then give a simple example, and then name a common mistake or misconception. That pattern forces you to cover definition, purpose, application, and risk, which mirrors how scenario questions work. For example, if you are practicing incident containment, you define containment as limiting harm, Explain that it protects systems and buys time. Give an example like isolating a compromised account, and warn about the mistake of taking a disruptive action without understanding business impact. You are not rehearsing a script to memorize. You are building a habit of complete explanation. After you speak, you pause and ask yourself what felt weak, because that weakness is your next build session. This simple loop turns every session into feedback without needing external tools. Because this is an audio-first plan, you should treat your voice as both a teaching tool and a measurement tool. When you can't explain something aloud, it usually means you don't yet understand it in a usable way, even if you could recognize it on a page. Spoken explanations also reveal whether your thinking is organized, because rambling is a signal that the concept has no clear structure in your mind. That matters for an incident leadership exam, because the best answers usually reflect organized reasoning, not scattered facts. So your plan should encourage concise clarity, where you can say what something is, what it's for, and what you would do with it. Another benefit is that speaking creates a mild pressure, and mild pressure is good training for exam conditions. You learn to choose words, commit to a direction, and keep going even when you feel imperfect, which is a realistic rehearsal for decision questions. As you work through objectives, you should also build a habit of linking each concept to a phase of incident response, because phase awareness helps you answer best next step questions. Even if the exam does not label phases in the question, scenarios often imply them through context. Early phase questions often revolve around clarity, validation, roles, and evidence integrity, because acting on wrong assumptions can cause major damage. Mid-phase questions often involve containment and coordination, where the goal is to stop harm while keeping the organization functioning. Late-phase questions often revolve around recovery priorities, communications, and sustained improvement, where stability and trust become central. In your spoken plan, you can practice by adding a sentence that says which phase your concept usually supports and why. This one sentence trains your brain to place the idea in time, not just in definition. When you do that repeatedly, your exam instincts become faster because you will recognize what the scenario is asking for sooner. A strong plan also accounts for the difference between knowing a concept and being able to apply it with limited information. Application requires you to handle uncertainty, which is common in incident work, and it is a common exam theme. You can train application by using small imagined scenarios that are simple and non-technical, like a report that multiple users can't log in, or a warning that a server is behaving strangely, or a claim that sensitive data was emailed externally. Then you practice the leadership thinking, not the technical diagnosis, by asking what you would confirm, who you would involve, what you would document, and what your immediate goal would be. The point is not to invent deep details, but to practice selecting priorities and protecting the organization's interests. When you keep scenarios simple, you avoid getting lost in implementation, and you stay aligned with incident leadership responsibilities. This kind of practice makes objectives feel real, and real understanding sticks better than abstract memorization. To keep your plan sustainable, you need a way to handle days when you have low energy or little time, because those days will happen. The mistake is having an all-or-nothing plan where missing one long session feels like failure, and then the whole routine collapses. Instead, build a minimum version that is always possible, like a short spoken drill you can do while walking, commuting, or doing a basic chore. The minimum version might be choosing one concept and doing a 2-minute explanation using the same structure of definition, why it matters, example, and mistake. The goal of the minimum version is not deep learning. It is keeping the chain unbroken so your brain stays connected to the material. On higher energy days, you expand into longer sessions with 2 or 3 concepts, and you include a quick self-check afterward. This flexible approach matches real life, and it prevents guilt from becoming the reason you stop studying. Your plan should also include deliberate review, but review that is active rather than passive. Passive review is rereading notes, which can create the feeling of familiarity without building recall. Active review is forcing yourself to produce the idea from memory, then checking what you missed, then trying again later. In spoken form, active review can sound like answering the same prompt on different days and noticing what improves. When your explanation becomes shorter but clearer, that's progress, because clarity is the point, not length. When your explanation becomes more confident, and you start using the right distinctions automatically, that's progress too. If you find that you keep stumbling on the same part, that is a signal to simplify the concept and rebuild it from first principles. A good plan treats repeated stumbling as useful data, not as proof that you are bad at the material. You are training, and training is supposed to reveal weakness so it can be strengthened. Another key piece is learning how to calibrate difficulty, because your brain needs both success and challenge to improve. If everything you practice is easy, you don't build resilience for exam questions that require trade-offs. If everything you practice is hard, you get discouraged and your sessions become inconsistent. You can calibrate by mixing prompts that ask for explanation with prompts that ask for decisions. Explanation prompts are like teaching a beginner what something is and why it matters. Decision prompts are like choosing what to do next when two priorities conflict, such as evidence preservation versus speed or containment versus business continuity. For a beginner, decision prompts should still be simple, but they should force a choice and a justification. You want to be able to say why your choice fits the incident leader role and the likely phase of the incident. That justification practice directly supports how the exam differentiates between similar-looking answer options. As you move through objectives, it helps to build a small set of anchor questions that you can apply to almost any concept, because anchor questions create consistency across your study. An anchor question might be what problem this concept solves, what could go wrong if it is ignored, who is responsible for it, and what evidence shows it is working. Those questions fit incident leadership because they push you toward outcomes, ownership, and verification, which are common themes in incident work. You can speak these anchors quickly, and they help you avoid studying in a shallow way. They also prepare you for exam questions that ask for best practices, because best practices are often about preventing predictable failures. When you apply the same anchor questions across many topics, you start noticing patterns, like how clarity and ownership show up everywhere. That pattern recognition is powerful because it reduces cognitive load during the exam. Instead of treating each question as totally new, you recognize the familiar leadership principles underneath. Finally, your spoken study plan should include a way to measure readiness without turning your life into a constant test. A simple measure is whether you can explain each objective-sized concept in plain language without drifting into vague statements. Another measure is whether you can answer decision prompts with a clear goal and a clear next action, rather than listing many actions. A third measure is whether you can spot common traps, like choosing an action that is too technical for the role, or choosing an action that skips evidence integrity, or choosing an action that sounds comforting but lacks ownership. These measures don't require numbers. They require honest listening to your own explanations. If you want a framework, you can borrow the idea of specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound, SMART, as a mental check for your routine, where you keep sessions specific, short enough to achieve, relevant to objectives, and consistent in time. The point is to keep improving steadily, not to create pressure. To close, the most effective plan is the one you can repeat, because consistency beats intensity for beginners learning a new field. When you build a spoken routine that translates objectives into prompts, balances building with testing, and cycles through every theme regularly, you create full coverage without burnout. Your voice becomes your feedback tool, because clear spoken explanations are the closest thing to a readiness signal you can get without sitting in the exam itself. As you keep practicing, you will notice that objectives stop feeling like separate topics and start feeling like connected skills, which is exactly how incident leadership works in real life. You'll also find that exam questions become easier to interpret because you can quickly identify the kind of thinking being tested and respond with disciplined reasoning. Keep the sessions small, keep them frequent, and keep them honest, and you'll build confidence that is based on capability rather than hope.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit BareMetalCyber.com.